and welcome to Accommodating Students on the Margins. My name is Allison Bernizzi. I'm at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, teaching the Comm Studies Department. I'm the course director for our analysis of argument class. And our plan for today, or the plan I have for us today, is to take about 10 minutes to introduce whoever was coming from Fountainhead and Joe and me and maybe the idea of today. And then take some time to think about our learning objectives, what our goals are, some barriers that students encounter, and maybe ways to eliminate those barriers. And in between, I have some really short videos that I'd like to share with you. So it's not a lot of me talking, and it's mostly you talking and sharing ideas. And if that plan's okay with you, I will move forward. If you have something you would like to discuss that I haven't thought about, please put it in the chat, and I will do my best to monitor the chat as we go along. So here was just a slide of me. This is a way to get a hold of me if you want to talk about these topics later. I think I put, this is the fun part of being me, but here's a link to the slides. You should be able to access them if you'd like to follow along. And I'd like to share with you a video about innovating at the margins. So here we go. It's a short 1-minute video made by the people that are connected with CAST. They are the beacons of UDL. They developed universal design for learning in the early 80s.
So some of the most innovative users of UDL are really the institution.
Oh, sorry.
So some of the most innovative users of UDL are really the institutions or the professors that are serving students that are the ones at the margins. They're serving students that are first generation college students. They're serving students that are low income. They're serving students that are English language learners and students with disabilities. For those institutions and those faculty members, UDL isn't a set of strategies or techniques. It's a value system. It's how you teach and learn. It's foundational. And those are the people who are really going to bring this innovation from the margins to the middle, because they're going to show that by serving students that are the least well suited to one size fits all, everybody benefits. Everybody gets something out of it, including the faculty members, including the institutions themselves.
Okay, and so what I'd like to do is have you take a moment and in the chat window, identify a class that you teach, talk about what we're teaching, and some of its related learning objectives. What are some of the underlying learning objectives in a course that you're teaching? Just think of one course and write that in the chat. I will join you. So in the speech class, one foundational learning objective is that students see communication as a transactional process. In a research methods class, the students can design a methodologically sound qualitative research study. My class, it's really important that students can back up claims with evidence in writing, public speaking, or assess and adapt to different kinds of speaking situations and diverse audiences. Group communication, understand and work effectively with diverse members. Data analytics, survey the needs and importance of data analytics in various contexts. Strive to become more effective intercultural communicators through observation and analysis of our own behavior and various cultural groups. Public speaking, deliver speeches to a variety of audiences. And so we have a lot of goals between us. And one of the key point in I could do this better. A key point in universal design or planning for students at the margins is really understanding what our goals are and thinking about ways students can demonstrate that they're meeting, that they've met that goal. And so sometimes that's a challenge. And I think many of us are here because we found challenges to serving and accommodating people's needs in the classroom. So I'd like to take a few minutes and have you work together to identify barriers that students face in trying to meet the learning outcome that you put forward just in the chat. So I'm going to break you up into, I say this like I'm going to do it quickly, but I'm going to put you in some groups, and I have a slide I want to share with you. Sorry, I have a hard time talking and thinking at the same time. So I've just shared with you a slide deck that is blank right now. And I'm going to put you in groups where I ask you to please introduce yourselves and then choose someone to record the barriers you're identifying and a speaker who might be willing to share out to the group. But I'd like you to identify the biggest barriers students face in meeting the learning objectives that you've identified. And then if the recorder would record the barriers on the slide that's connected to, if you're group 4, you should write on the first slide of group 4. That would be awesome, the barrier slide. And I feel like I am frazzled, but I am frazzled. So let me get you into groups and have you start sharing. I figure you'll spend about 8 minutes together in that group. So introduce yourselves, choose a person, identify the biggest barriers in meeting the learning objective you're thinking about. And we've got that many people. So I think we'll just have 3 or 4. We'll have 4 groups. So off you go. Thank you. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, how are you, Allison?
I am well. Folks are in a breakout room for another 3 minutes. Would you like?
Okay. I can wait.
Okay.
I was teaching.
So was I. I was a little frazzled. Is there? Right now, we are talking about. We were thinking about our course objectives and student barriers to meeting those objectives. And I don't know if you want to brainstorm with me, but I would be willing to. What are the kind of barriers that you see that students struggle with meeting your course objectives?
That's a great question. I have no, give me an idea.
Oh, I don't know. What is a course? What do you teach and what's your course objective?
Okay. I teach communication. So I teach this semester a public speaking and interpersonal communication. Next semester, I will have an entrepreneur communication and a advanced interpersonal communication.
That sounds fascinating.
Barriers I've had have been because public speaking and speaking, there are barriers that are things that have to do with, you know, audience and speaking, and with the technology that becomes a barrier. Or I have had a visually impaired student this semester that's been a problem. But I live in Kansas, so I have I live in a PWI, so I have a primarily, sheltered white, don't get issues, and trying to make them real for them. And when I do have a non-white student, a lot of them disappear. Like I had one student this semester who would have been great to have conversations with, but he managed to get himself exempted from coming to class by getting himself an internship and being out of town all semester. So that made things, for the conversation, being on the margin difficult. But you're saying accommodating students. So that's the other part of this is, how do you deal with the ADHD student who comes on class who wants to monopolize the Zoom?
Yeah. So some of the what are the barriers for them achieving what it is that you want them to achieve? Do you have a learning objective for like listening or?
Yeah, that would be great. I should have a learning objective for listening, but I don't. And the other part is, this semester, I don't know why, and maybe other schools have had this happen, but our disability services, that's not what they're called, I don't know what they're called, but they have taken a totally hands-off perspective and pretty much just walked away from having any responsibility for disability services.
I know ours is our disability services office is overwhelmed by the number of people with needs, and that is creating difficulty for them for sure.
Yeah, they're not doing anything though. Our people aren't.
Wow.
All they're doing is accommodating COVID.
Well, we can talk more about that. Folks are coming back in, and Jill, if there's any way you could assist me in helping think through some of the themes, if there are themes that can be identified, I'd be very grateful.
So Allison, are you the leader?
The fearless leader. I am one person that said, yes, I would do this.
Well, thanks for talking to me.
You're welcome. You are welcome. Okay, so as people are coming back, let's see where we are. It looks like everybody is back. Let's think about, let me share, or I am sharing the screen. Let's share some of the barriers that you found present for students trying to achieve your learning objectives, or the other things that came up. So group one has a logistical issue of how do you work with an interpreter and their role. Some challenges with normalizing disability, destigmatizing disability, equity issues for first generation and rural, low economic. Am I correct in thinking that these have to do with technology or other?
Yeah,
I would say yes, and yes, right? So technology and beyond.
That is not
Excuse
the
me,
two
Allison?
academia. Yeah,
Could we start with what the learning outcome was that they're working from?
sure, absolutely. Would group one tell us what the learning outcomes you were thinking about were?
Go ahead, Jessica.
Okay, well, Jen and I actually had sort of similar learning outcomes in the sense that she's teaching an intercultural class and I had a small group and team course. So both of our outcomes revolved around interaction, ethical interaction, effective interaction between diverse people.
Great. And so failing to recognize difference as good or assuming similarity, right? So absolute barriers. Let's move to group two. Will group two tell me what kind of goal you were thinking of, or if it was multiple goals?
Dave, do you want me to go? I can. We talked about our courses generally. So kind of overarching from the basic course up to the graduate courses that we teach, what are some thematic barriers that we see? And oftentimes, we talked about how a lot of them can be attitudinal, this preconceived notion of, not being able to do whatever it is we're asking them to do, whether it's get up and give a speech or do data analysis. We both work at institutions with a lot of first generation students. And so imposter syndrome, and then cultural expectations from their families, and other groups that kind of contradict some of the expectations that we have for them. And then right now, everything from technology to financial resources for students, and then resources for faculty as well.
Those are big challenges. And then let's look at group four. What barriers to meeting you? What were your learning objectives that you were thinking about? And then what barriers did you find that students faced in achieving them?
All right, so I can get us started, and then Michelle and Josh, feel free to jump in if you'd like to. So our group four talked primarily about the learning objective of adapting to diverse audiences. And so two of the primary barriers that we identified were just having working with students that maybe don't have access or exposure to people of diverse backgrounds, could be one, or students in the class aren't from diverse backgrounds, or perhaps don't have a super, we didn't write this on the slide, but don't have a super nuanced understanding of what diversity means. So we talked a little bit about invisible aspects of diversity that students might not have on their radar, but that we have to spend time discussing in class and helping students to understand. So those were a couple of the barriers that we discussed. Yeah, feel free to jump in, and Joshua and Michelle, if you have other things you wanted to add. And then I think when we get to our next slide, we strategized a few ways that we could approach those barriers.
Okay, so let's, if you don't mind, let's think about, what I'd like to do is think about we've listed a series of barriers. If we work in the same kind of size groups we've worked in, we'll have about 3 groups that are operating. What 3 of these barriers would you like to tackle going forward? We have, it seems to be there, attitudinal barriers seems like a theme that came out that when you think about imposter syndrome and the expectations of people around them. So that might be one theme of barriers that we could tackle. Resources might be another area we could tackle. And then maybe the ethical interaction and logistical concern that is on the table. Does that seem like a good way forward for us to meet your needs that brought you to this session? see some nodding heads. I just want to make sure that your time, that you get what you are hoping to get from having this conversation. Okay. So, go ahead.
Sounds good, Allison.
Thanks. I just need to get out and back. I have all these crafty ways of doing things and still haven't figured out how to move. That is a me problem. Will always be a me problem. Okay, so what I was thinking that we do is, now that we've talked about some of the barriers that we face, I wanted to talk a little bit about ways to, or start thinking about how to address maybe some of the barriers using principles of universal design for learning. And the folks at CAST and people have done research after talk about three major learning networks. The recognition network, which is the what we teach, kind of the content of what we are sharing with our students. And they recommend that we use multiple ways of sharing that content. So maybe it's difficult for students to recognize diversity by just reading about it if they haven't had those interaction experiences, or so maybe videos or whatever might help in those contexts. If you can't get speakers to come in, that might be helpful. The strategic learning network is how students can act and express what they're learning, and provide scaffolds for executive function, which is still developing until students are about 26 years old. We're still teaching executive function skills and modeling those things. And then the affective learning network, which is really related to the why of learning, our engagement in learning, how we feel about what we're learning, how we feel about other tasks we've experienced in the past, and the way we feel about what we're being asked to learn. Really, if we don't have a lot of positive experiences doing that kind of learning, it's very hard to persist. Like, you don't have as much, you don't have as many outlets to figure out ways to make it to the end of the road when you're feeling negatively about this experience in the past. And so part of our job is to think about ways we can reframe for folks who have not had really positive experiences in school, or might have people speaking to them about not having positive experiences with school, ways to reframe and persist, right? To help them change, to have a history of success with an activity. So I'd like to show you a video about UDL and assessment. And it goes kind of with what is our goal of what we're doing. And maybe that will help us think of ways we can start thinking of eliminating barriers. Let me see if I can make that click.
UDL on campus, Universal Design for Learning in Higher Education.
An introduction to UDL and assessment. Reducing learning barriers is of vital importance in post-secondary settings, as learners arrive in colleges and universities with a diverse set of experiences. What may be a preferred learning mode for one individual may be an obstacle for another. In learning environments, individual variability is the norm, not the exception. Instructors of post-secondary courses set goals for learners. Assessment is used in courses to determine how well learners are meeting instructional goals. Goals need to be clear and separate from the means of achieving them. Assessment should offer more than one route for demonstrating mastery. A critical part of assessment is the construct. Construct is the term used to define the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be assessed. Construct relevant factors refer to factors such as type of presentation or response that are related to the construct that the test is intended to measure. Many assessments include features that are not relevant to the construct being assessed. These are considered construct irrelevant items. These features may pose barriers for some learners and impact their performance on the assessment. That's where Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, comes into play. As a set of 3 principles for curriculum development, UDL provides a blueprint for creating instructional goals, assessments, methods, and materials that work for the widest possible range of learners. This flexible approach to curriculum development can positively impact how learners perform on assessments and result in a more authentic appraisal of learner achievement. The first principle, representation, focuses on the ways in which information, including assessment items, is presented. These can be charts, graphs, images, videos, demonstrations, or objects to manipulate. The second principle, action and expression, focuses on how learners demonstrate what they have learned. Do they have the option to write or draw? Do they have the option to present their capabilities through multimedia or a recording? The third principle, engagement, focuses on enhancing motivation and persistence. When their achievement is assessed, are they sufficiently but not overly challenged? Do they have options and variety in how they are assessed to help reduce anxiety? It is important for instructors to be aware of the inherent variability of learners, the existence of barriers that may impede both the acquisition of information and expressing their competencies. Designing assessments with these challenges in mind will allow for greater flexibility to ensure learner success.
So I'm wondering, one of the things that I was thinking about, just as I've been synthesizing what you have all said and about the size of our group, I'm wondering if it would be useful, if you'd rather go back into groups and talk about eliminating barriers, or if it would be more useful for us to talk in this small group about each of the 3 themes we've identified, and then maybe how the ideas of the multiple means of representation and strategy or expression and affect might be ways we could start to eliminate some of the barriers you've identified. Which way forward would you like to go? It's a choose your own adventure afternoon.
Go for the latter, given that we're so small.
I agree. I'd like to hear what people think about the different problems together. So I think that would be great.
Super. If we're all kind of on that page, then let's go that way. So can we start talking about the barrier of resources first? Would that be okay with you? Great. So what are some ways that we can eliminate some of the resource barriers for students to be able to achieve in our classrooms? What are your ideas?
I think one of the ways that you can do that is with the resources that you ask and materials that you ask students to have. So there are open access resources that you can use. There are resources that are built into their tuition bill, which means that their financial aid will make sure that they have access to those materials. Making sure in a traditional semester with on-campus students that things are available either physically in the library or digitally in the library for them.
Great, thank you. What other ways can we eliminate barriers to resources?
I think giving students options always then creates ways for them to, in terms of, let's say that you have different readings that potentially you want students to do, the ability to access those readings, the type of, readings that are available. Maybe there's a video that will work just as well as one of the readings to prepare them for class. And so I think in that way, that's kind of a different type of resource, but a way that might give students some flexibility and some time in terms of kind of lightening their load or making, facilitating their ability to prepare for class.
along that line, I am always resources that were once built for people with disabilities have become widely available to many of us. And so I just left a class where I taught a lot about screen readers. And if I make my readings available and ensure that they have optical character recognition turned on when I put them on my learning management system, folks can download them into a screen reader, or if they're using Apple products, they can turn on VoiceOver and it can be read to them while they cook dinner, right? Or while they drive wherever they're driving, safely, I hope. But reducing the barriers of time for people and having to sit and do the task of reading print that can be eliminated.
And Allison, I was just going to sort of add on to that. So time was going to be my thought when I think of resources, I think of time right now. Yeah. But maybe it's altering the schedule of the class. Maybe it's altering assignments. Maybe it's, reframing and envisioning assignments so that it's not like you have to take a 50-minute test and, answer 40 questions in that time frame, on top of asking them to make sure they're not cheating from the book. All of that stuff. I just feel like it puts so many stressful sort of constraints on students. So just thinking in different ways so that it's not all about memorization and time and just packing it into this one little square. It's about giving them space and freedom to explore resources and then make critical connections and apply.
I'm a professional bobblehead, Jessica, because, it goes back to knowing what it is that we want students to do or what we want out of the chapter reading we've asked people to do, right? And so if the quiz is just to verify that you've read it, I'm okay with, if you're going to read it for the first time to answer my quiz, I'm okay with giving you time to do that and use the resource. That it just makes a lot of sense to me that if the goal is not that you can remember it kind of with a gun held to your head, right? Like, I don't know a better way to say it. I think that being able to be free with time is helpful. Thank you for bringing that up. Can you think of other ways that we can eliminate barriers with resources? How comfortable are you referring people to different resources on campus?
I don't have a problem referring to other sources on campus if the sources on campus are doing their job. I was mentioning to Allison before, I have an office for, I think it was the Disability Services Office, but that's not their name anymore. They've changed their name so many times, I forget what it's called now. But they have pretty much quit doing that job, and they're just taking care of COVID. And so right now, we don't even have a service for students with accommodations for students. And faculty are just supposed to take care of that on their own. Yeah, I like that look, Jill. That's exactly my thought. What am I supposed to do with my student who has, what'd you call it, a screen reader? He's got a screen reader in my class, and I'm supposed to provide extra time for him to take a test, extra everything, and yet I have no accommodation letter. I'm not supposed to ask questions, and I know that, but I have no knowledge about what he needs. So what do? It's extremely frustrating right now. How do you refer anybody to, what do you do with that?
Wow. If it was me, and this might not get you anywhere, I would probably go to student affairs, or however your university umbrella works.
They're under student affairs.
I would probably and phrase it just like you said. How do I know what what I'm supposed to do to serve this student if I'm not being given the guidance that I need, and I don't, and I want, because I mean, there's legal frameworks that we're talking about here. There are, a lot of, it's a very difficult issue to navigate, and to be able to serve that student well, there's a mandate for that type of office. And so if it was me at my university, I would likely go to the Dean of Student Affairs, Dean of Students, and, inquire about this issue and, what's going to be done moving forward.
To tack on to that, I would recommend also looping in your provost or vice president for academic affairs, because sometimes that vice president for student development or student affairs isn't necessarily communicating with the VPAA. And this is one of those parts of our jobs where both of those people need to be in the loop. And certainly the VPAA can advocate for the faculty to some extent, but like Jill said, this legally it really falls to us. It's nice to have an office that supports us, but it really does fall to us to provide those accommodations. We need to know what they are, of course. So like I said, I would make sure that both of those vice presidents, or whatever they're called on your campus, are involved in that conversation.
Thanks.
I also think that it's fair. When I have students that have identified as having a disability to me, I always ask them about what kinds of accommodations they use, and then what would that look like in my class, right? So tell me how you've used this elsewhere. I think those are fair questions to ask the student who will, if they're using a screen reader, they know how to use them. So I think it's, or usually they've been using them for a while, and so they know how they work, and they can tell you what they need. And coming straight from them is sometimes better than a letter, right? Just getting to know. Would you like to pause here with the resource conversation and think about attitudes, or think about logistical issues with and ethical issues with service provider or service provision? Or do you have other questions you'd like to ask? And I can't believe we only have 13 minutes left. But can we as a group kind of hive mind questions you have, or should we start thinking about ways that we eliminate attitudinal barriers? And if we can do that in 13 minutes or at all, that will be miraculous.
Let's try.
Pardon?
Let's try.
Let's try. Yeah, I was going to say, I think particularly right now, the attitudinal is challenging just because everyone is so stressed, and I just find students and faculty alike saying, I can't do anymore, I can't bend anymore, I can't adapt anymore. And so maybe in a typical semester our attitude is more open. But I just thought I think that one's particularly interesting right now. But
so how do we start to eliminate attitudinal barriers?
I think it's about relationships with your students. I think that's where it happens. I mean, there's no quick and easy, there's no silver bullet to this, or whatever the platitude that people like to use on it. It's not easy. And I think it's always evolving since I've been in this racket. The student body personality and kind of like has changed quite a bit. It is different than when I was a student a million years ago. And so, I mean, it's a discussion I had with people I went to grad school when we used to, when you meet up at conferences or talk on the phone, it's like, oh man, students are way different, and so it's being flexible as a professor, instructor, or whatever my title is. And then, and then I have to be reflective. I always say, remind myself that like, oh, I was that idiot when I was 18, and at certain levels. And not that I'm that much more mature these days, but I mean, try to put myself in the student's shoes sometimes where it's frustrating. So, and that's hard sometimes because it's just, you're dealing with a lot. It's different. No, it's like, as a student, you're just dealing with one professor. Now as a professor, you're dealing with umpteenth amount of students, and that's a lot. And so, I don't know. I ramble. I don't have an answer. Just saying.
You do have an answer in there, and modeling how you found your way out is a way to show student. If it's a student attitudinal barrier or a colleague attitudinal barrier, being able to narrate what you've seen or where you've come from or how you did it gives people ideas, right? And so I hear you with a solution and just showing people like, hey, I remember doing that, and these are the things I did to be over here now.
And I was going to say, I think this connects not only to that why, but or to not only the how, but the why, right? So just helping people understand that this is much more effective as well, and that there is benefit in us persevering and us, being resilient and figuring out how to continue to work with one another and focus on one another, and meeting needs.
I encountered an attitudinal barrier this semester that I never anticipated. And so I was trying very hard to get my students out of their comfort zones and at the same time, give them multiple ways to represent their learning. And so I told them that they needed to do anything except a slide deck presentation. They could do a podcast, they could do a vlog, they could do a blog. I didn't care how they presented the information. It just couldn't be a voiceover slide deck. And my students were beyond themselves because they had to make a choice. And that was an attitudinal issue that I hadn't really thought about. Well, just tell me which one to do. Which one is easiest? Just tell me. And I didn't anticipate that. So in my attempt to be more UDL friendly, I actually created more anxiety among my students than I had ever anticipated. But I think some of this is about expanding their comfort zones, kind of pushing those edges out further and further, so that there isn't as much of a black and white, this or that mentality.
Michelle, do you think that is a result of like high school students? So I'll just use a traditional student being taught to a test, and then when they come to college, they're given a little bit, we expect them to have a little bit more freedom and independent thought, and that kind of freaks them out?
I don't actually think it's high school, because after it happened, Dave, I started asking my students some other questions. In research methods, you can ask all kinds of questions as this notion of, well, I just want to show you different ways to collect data. And one of the questions I asked them was about how much control they had over their free time growing up. And less than a third of my students, probably close to a quarter of my students, got to decide what they wanted to do with 50% or more of their free time. And the rest of them had parents who decided between 75 and 100% of their free time for them.
I asked that because I have do projects and they turn them in and like, what are you looking for? I'm like, well, if I'm dealing with an outside, client for the class, I'm like, what does the client want? And then that's really what I'm looking for. I don't have a definitive answer because each semester the client's different and their needs are different. And so it becomes, they go, well, what do you want? So it's almost like they're trying to please me instead of the learning, which I get frustrated with. And so that's where I'm fighting the attitudinal barrier. And I'm also like, there's many ways to do it. I had an example in a class where it was, public speaking, intercultural. I had an assignment where they did a country and a girl did a rap video. And I was like, that's not how I would do it. And then I had to take a step back and go, well, maybe what's okay. It's not the way I do it, but she's still meeting the criteria for the assignment. It's just not in my little personal rubric. So I had to like regrade the assignment after I stepped back. So sometimes students really put me out of my comfort zone too. And I think I was like, those are the students I'm thankful for in hindsight. In the moment, I'm like, you're really challenging me. But I don't know. I mean, do you run into that? What are your thoughts on that, Michelle? Or anybody else? I'm sorry.
I think No Child Left Behind and standardized testing are a huge component of where we're at today in terms of those kinds of attitudinal barriers, because everything is presented to them as color in the correct bubble and you will be fine.
And that's what's fortunate that No Child Left Behind sunset in 2015, right? It's the people we're dealing with today. But when the ESSA took over, they built in a lot of UDL, and hopefully we're going to turn the dial so that, I'm concerned that we still teach to the middle and that we're not really teaching at the margins or thinking about the margins. And then we're going to get students that come up through school now and expect that we have flexibility we haven't built in. And that's my concern, is that they might not be here right now, but they're coming, and we need to make shifts in the way we're thinking.
I hope you're right, Allison. I have a middle schooler, and that's not what I'm seeing in her education. But I certainly hope that you're right, and she's the anomaly.
I'm sad. I think I'm probably wrong, but I know that the law says UDL should be the guiding principle for everything. And, I think even knowing that lets you go back to the school district and say, what does UDL look like here? But that's more work. Sorry. I was trying to reduce work and I seem to just make more of it. We've got about 4 minutes left. How would you, do you have remaining questions? Or there was a question, like a logistical question about interpreters. Is that person still here? And do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'm still here. I was just pointing out that on my campus, we're very, very small. And this is our first, to my knowledge, I've been here for 13 years, our first ever deaf student on campus who needed a full-time interpreter. And thinking about the COVID situation only exacerbated things because faculty were not used to having interpreters, and also because everything is so weird with our de-densified classes and high flex models. They regularly weren't communicating with the interpreter, which ultimately was very frustrating for her, but even more problematic for the student who needed the interpreter. And the faculty members really didn't recognize that that was an issue of accessibility. So that was I'm friends with the interpreter, so it was top of mind for that reason. And I don't really have a solution or anything to offer other than just paying attention to those things.
I think last spring was my first time that I had a student that had live captioners, and I didn't know what the role of live captioning would be. And I had 2 live captioners for one person. So I didn't, it is, there is a comfort that comes from having the experience. And I think that's when many of you were talking about diversity being a challenge and not having the experiences to be in diverse audiences or to interact with diverse people. It's hard to use the abstract concept and imagine it, because really it's once you have the experience, you're like, oh, well, they're just going to sit over there and type everything I say, and I'll work on asking people to speak louder so that they can hear, right? But it does take being in the situation to realize that you can handle it, and that how it does work. And disability has been everything I have lived with for the last 28 years. And I was like, what am I going to do with this person? Or the first time I had a visually impaired student, I'm like, learning from them, from their grace. So, I mean, I wanted to, before we leave, I wanted to share with you some resources I've put together for you about using UDL or UDL concepts in higher ed. There are some great books. The Black and More book is really, really tiny. This resource here, the free resources from CAST, there is this amazing book. Somebody was talking about if there was a book that, or about a reading and maybe there was an associated video. This book does that. There's video links in the book that you can not read the book and see the links. But what's really great about this book is that it's free to you. If you sign up for an account here at CAST, you get access to 5 of their tools, which I think is helpful, and you could learn a whole lot more about UDL if it's useful to you. And then there are a bunch of great websites that talk about UDL on campus. Often when we're hearing about universal design, they talk about kids, and I worked really hard not to show you kids videos because we're not dealing with kids, we've got students. And I just want to take this last minute to thank you and Fountainhead for providing us this space and being here to have, I hope, a useful conversation. And with that, see you later.
Thank you.
Thank
Nice to see
you.
everybody.
Nice to meet you.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.